Hello, this is Professor Keen, and I am talking about the topic of submerged bodies today. So submerged bodies. And the reference here is a student's guide to the grade physics texts, chapter 15, and this is from Pascal's treatise on fluids. This is from Pascal's treatise on fluids. And just some background, so Pascal had pointed out already that the hydrostatic pressure that a fluid exerts on every surface of a submerged body increases with depth. This is due to the fact that at any particular depth, the weight of the water, or whatever other fluid you've submerged this in, the weight of the water, which weighs down on the object, depends on the depth of the object. So the deeper you go, the more water there is above it, and so the greater the weight is, and so the greater the hydrostatic pressure is. Perhaps you've noticed that when you dive into a swimming pool, as you go down, your ears feel increasing pressure as you descend to the bottom of the pool. That is, you start to feel pain. So this is an observation that we all have, is that your ears detect pain, which increases with depth. Right? And so this raises the question that Pascal specifically raises, is how is it that deep sea creatures can survive at enormous depths? How is it that deep sea creatures survive at great depths? In other words, why are they not crushed? After all, if you feel pain when you only go down about 10 or 15 feet, why is it that some sea creatures can go down hundreds or even thousands of feet and not feel extraordinary pain, that is, not be crushed? So before we can directly address that question, I think we need to talk more generally about the topic of compressible bodies in water. What I mean by a compressible body is one that can get squished. And technically speaking, anything can get squished, but certain things are really hard to squish and other things are easy to squish. So, a steel block we would call an incompressible body, and a balloon we would call a compressible body, or your flesh would be a compressible body. A sponge would be a compressible body, but one that we typically think of as hard, we call that incompressible. But again, strictly speaking, all objects are compressible, just some objects are more compressible than others. Okay, so let's talk about compressible bodies in water. And what I've done here is I've put up this diagram on the right-hand side, figure 14.1 from Pascal's treatise on the equilibrium of fluids. And I want to focus, first of all, on this diagram right here, that is figure 14. So I'm going to re-sketch this for a moment. I want you to consider figure 14. And the idea here is that you have a long glass tube, and Pascal says, suppose that this glass tube is 20 feet long. And on the end of it, you secure a bellows. You probably know what a bellows is if you've ever built a fire. It's a couple of wooden panels on the sides with fabric material that forms kind of a balloon, and you can press it in and out to blow air on your fire. That's what we mean by a bellows. Okay? And so suppose we take this bellows, let me move this up to here for the moment, and this is all full of air right now. This is open at the top of the glass tube, and we submerge this underwater. So up here at the top, we have air, and all this down here is water. And so what happens is that when you put this underwater, this entire thing is full of air. Let me just draw some dots representing air. What color do I want to make this? Oh, let's make it red. So this all is air up here, and the bellows and the tube are all full of air as well. This is just to specify there's no water inside of here. And what happens is that because the bottom, the bellows, is at great depth, there's an enormous amount of pressure. Of course, it depends on how deep it is, which causes a force to push in on the sides of the bellows, like this, right? So there's force pushing in on the sides of the bellows. So this is figure Roman numeral 14 over here on the right-hand side, right here. And so the main point is that it is difficult to open the bellows. Why is it difficult to open the bellows? Well, because in order to do so, you have to overcome this force that the water is pushing on the side with. So you can do it. You can pull on the sides really hard, but in so doing, you have to overcome this force. And the deeper the bellows is, the greater the weight of the water pressing in on the sides. That is the greater pressure, and so the harder it is to open and close it. So if you, the force required to open it depends on the depth. Okay, and another way that's interesting to think about it, I think Pascal even mentions this, when you try to open the bellows, you're essentially trying to create a little pocket of air underwater, right? And what you're doing when you pull that bellows apart and try to open it, you're essentially lifting up the entire pool of water. So if you have a swimming pool and this glass tube sticking out of the top and a bellows at the bottom, and you open up this bellows, you're essentially lifting the level of the water. The water actually has to rise. And so the force you're feeling is really the force it takes to lift that entire pool of water by an inch or two, or however many inches it goes up when you open up the bellows. Okay, so that's an interesting way to think about this. All right, now let's go on to his figure number 6. I'm sorry, figure number 16. Okay, this is over here. And this is the case of not a bellows attached to a tube, but imagine now that you have this tube. Once again, it's a 20-foot long tube, a glass tube. And now on the end of it, instead of a bellows, you put a little bag full of liquid mercury. Okay, and let me move this over to here. So a bag full of liquid mercury, and you put this whole thing once again underwater, and I'll denote the air right here above it. And what color should we make the liquid mercury? Let's make it, oh, I don't know, kind of let's make it green. So this will be our liquid mercury inside of this bag. And here's the point that Pascal is making, is that depending on the depth of the water, the liquid mercury will rise to different heights in the water. So the water, just as the water is pressing on the bellows, the water pressure compresses the bag of mercury, and this forces, so forcing the mercury up into the glass tube. And the height that the mercury goes to depends on how deep the water is. So if I draw a line right here at the level of the bag, this depth right here, that's the height of the water. So I'll write in height of the H2O. And this right here would be the height of the mercury. So this column of water is pressing on this bag, and it's pushing the mercury up like this, and it pushes it up until the weight of this column of mercury is exactly equal to the weight of that column of water. So in other words, the mercury level, the Hg level, will be 1, can you guess what it is? 1/14 the level of the water above the bag. Why is this? Well, as we mentioned in the last lecture, this is because the specific gravity of mercury is 14. That is, the density is 14 times the density of water. So it only takes, let's say if this was submerged by 14 feet, there'd be 1 foot of mercury. If you were to lift this up, let's say, so that the bag was only 7 feet underwater, then there'd only be a ½ foot of mercury. So the mercury level would fall inside of this, and there'd only be 6 inches of mercury up in the bag. Okay, so this is another example of how a compressible body behaves when you put it underwater. Now, here's, I think, one of the most interesting examples. This is from let's go to figure 17. I'm not going to try to redraw this picture. This is the one over here with this man, okay? So imagine a man he places a glass tube, he seals it against his leg, against his bare leg, as is shown in the diagram, and then he dives into the depths of the water, into a sea of water. What happens? What happens to him? Well, just like a compressible bag will have the mercury get forced up inside of it, so too the weight of the water pressing down on his body will try to force his flesh up into the tube. In other words, a welt will form on his leg, as the weight of the water attempts to push him up into the tube. He's not technically getting sucked up into the tube, he's being pushed up into the tube. And this is something that's actually interesting to think about, is that nothing really, we'll come across this later, nothing really sucks. I guess you can quote me on that. What's really happened is he's being pushed up into the tube from behind, not being sucked up through the tube, but pushed up into the tube. Just like this mercury-filled balloon, the mercury is getting pushed up, so too his flesh is being pushed up into the tube. This has implications, I guess I'll write implications, for deep sea diving or scuba diving. So let me I'm not going to write this down, I'm just going to talk for a moment. So think about when, let's suppose you wanted to go down deep into the ocean, or perhaps to the bottom of your pool. Why can you not just take your garden hose and have it lying there in the lawn with one end open, take the other end, pop it into your mouth, and then dive into the pool and go to the bottom and breathe through this garden hose? Well, the reason is because when you go to the bottom of the pool, all that weight of the water is pushing on your flesh and is trying to push you up into the tube. And so, maybe your tongue will get stuck up into the tube as you're getting pushed up in. And furthermore, it'll be very difficult to breathe, because essentially what you're trying to do, just like it was hard to open that bellows that was attached to the tube that goes up into the air, so too when you try to breathe in, you've got to create this opening in your lungs and suck air in, but you've got to overcome that force of the water pushing on the outside of your body. And the deeper you go, the harder and harder it is to breathe in, because you have the weight of the water that's pushing on you. So how do you do it? Well, typically what you do is you get a pressurized tank of air. That's what scuba divers use. They have a pressurized tank of air, and that's at very high pressure. And then they have a regulator that regulates the pressure of the tank, the pressure of the air coming out of the tank into your lungs. So let's suppose the pressure of the tank is at maybe 1,000 pounds per square inch, but you're at a particular depth where, let's say, the water pressure is 100 pounds per square inch on your body. So the regulator makes the air coming out of the tank be at 100 pounds per square inch. That is the same pressure as the ambient water pressure around you. That way you can breathe in and out regularly. So the regulator essentially adjusts the pressure of the air to match the pressure of the water that's surrounding you so that you can breathe quite easily. So let me take a pause right there, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about this shortly.